Good day, everyone. Good day, Doc Magan. Today, I'd like to share my thoughts on why I believe that post colonial oriented approach is essential in teaching English language and literature. Because actually, when I first encountered post colonial theory, I honestly thought that it was just simply about studying countries that was colonized or that had been colonized. But as I try to dig deeper, as I try to read more, also with the article, I realized that it is actually much more than history. It also it will make the people or even the readers think that the challenges that we have to face on the influences or the colonial influences that that continue to shape how we speak, continue to shape on how we read and what we value, and even how we see ourselves today. And as a student and as a future English educator, this realization made me actually reflect on my own experience of learning English because growing up, I was more on, I was reading more, I read more on texts that we studied that mostly came from England or British or came from America. But those works are, of course, they're important, but it's just really nice to see. And of course, it's very rare for me to encounter stories that are that reflects my own culture, um, my own experiences, and my own community, and something that is familiar to me. And sometimes I also I felt like maybe they're the best, or maybe the best literature, or those personal, because the creative, the most personal is the most creative. I just heard it from somewhere. Okay. So that's why I think a post colonial approach matters. And also, it reminds us that English is no longer just a global language. Of course, it's not just about because it is a universal language. It also talks about the society and how how the society shape or contributes to learning the language, and also of course the literature. And because of that, our classroom of course should also reflect these voices, these different stories and different experiences. And teaching English should not, just simply mean that teaching students how to become a native speaker, how to become just like the native speaker, or even to how to imitate the native speakers, or memorize the grammar, or maybe say something that the grammar is accurate. Because of course, maybe it's other people do that, but instead we should help learners understand that in language it's not just focus on that. There are other ways that we can closely connect to our identity, to our culture. And of course, when students, if they realize this, they become more confident and they'll be more interested in learning English without thinking that the other language or the other culture and the other stories are superior than than their own identity or their own cultural identity, without abandoning it. And I also believe that literature is meaningful because it is being taught through post-colonial lens. Because rather than just asking what happened in a story, of course there are a lot of things that you can ask, deeper questions, guide questions that the student can really interact and think outside the box with giving their personal answers, and encourage them to think critically instead of just reading what, like, just passive reading. And yeah, that. And of course, another reason is to value this approach just a post-colonial approach because it just promotes inclusivity. And then a classroom, there should be a classroom should be a place for students to say what they want to say, to feel that their own stories, their own experience, their own culture, their own histories are being heard and shared. And for British and American texts, students can also recognize that other experiences deserve to be heard, not just those countries, their stories, like British and American stories. And of course, that representation makes the learning in the classroom more engaging and also more empowering and interesting. And what also caught my attention while reading about the post-colonial perspective, the article, is that there's also a connection between the gender because colonial systems did not only shape cultures and languages, they also shape and the gender, the women and men, and how they're being represented and how they're being treated. And of course, many of this literary text, it shows and it reveals that women are often marginalized or even stereotyped to conform the roles that was created by the the patriarchal societies. And of course, this was reinforced during the colonial period. And this connection, it reminded me of how the article linked for this to explore how other perspective or how other perspective or perceptions of women are reflected in the Philippine short stories. And although its primary focus is gender, it also uh, shows or demonstrates that literature can also reveal how historical or how history or how the traditions and how the system continue to influence the women of today, and how they are viewed today. It also talks about just not just the gender analysis, but also the post-colonial analysis. Because when they work together, I believe this the when they work together, it will examine whose voices are privileged and whose voices were being um, historically historically been silenced. And as future educators, I think we have a really big responsibility, not only to teach the language, but also to just urge or encourage the students to become a thoughtful readers. That literature are not just about entertainment, it is also about the reflection of our society. Because through literature, the student, or through this approach or through the literature, the student will open their mind and open their heart and appreciate the diversity, um diverse culture, the diversity of how stories are being taught. And also they can question stereotypes, and they will also understand the history and how it is shaped in the present. And personally, I found this approach meaningful in teaching English education or English language teaching, because it allows the students to value local stories without totally rejecting the global literature. And also it teaches the students that learning English doesn't really mean becoming less of a Filipino or becoming less Filipino, or even distancing themselves or ourselves from our own identity. But instead, they will think that English is just, it becomes it communicates our own experiences and our own cultures and perspective, uh, to share also to the rest of the world. And in the end, I believe that the goal of teaching English language and literature is not really simply to produce students who are fluent in English. Of course, that's also important. But the more importantly, it is to develop students that are culturally aware of how of culturally aware and critical thinkers, and respectful of other different perspectives, and know that we are all diverse, and it will also reflect on the stories that they read. And this approach will help us teachers achieve that goal because it will encourage our student to recognize the most important thing, which is also diversity. If there is an inequality, of course, they have to challenge it, and they will also appreciate their own culture, and they will value the things that, especially stories that are personal. Yeah, I heard or I saw this video that, I mean, I'm not entirely sure if it is the exact verbatim, but it says that, I just forgot the one who uttered these words. Uh, the most personal is the most creative. So that is why it is not just those countries such as British and English have literature. Also for us Filipinos, we have our own identity and we have our own personal stories to tell, and that the students should also recognize that and should also give have the freedom to think that those stories, those English stories that are not Filipino stories, are not above us, but just equal, but in a different way of sharing or even telling it. So yeah, I guess I guess that's all. Thank you.